Hey guys, today our topic is pharmacodynamics, or at least part 1. By the end of this video, you should be able to define the concept of a drug, define pharmacodynamics, list the types of receptors and their known function, understand the principles of drug-receptor interactions, and apply the concept of dose-response relationships to clinical scenarios. The Food and Drug Administration defines a drug as a substance used in diagnosis or as a component of medication. Now, let's get into it. Today's topic is on pharmacodynamics. What is this? Pharmacodynamics is concerned about the effect of a drug at its site of action, the dose-response relationship of the drug, and the influence of other factors on the drug effects. Drugs have various targets of action. These include receptors, enzymes, DNA, ion pumps, and carrier molecules. The most important context of this video is the effect that the drug has on receptors. What are receptors? Receptors are like the little sensors of your body and are responsible for coordinating various systems that take place in your body. Drugs can act on these receptors and effect changes in the body. Receptors are protein components of the organism that binds the drug and initiates this effect. We have two types of receptors, intracellular and extracellular receptors. Nuclear receptors are intracellular receptors, and as the name suggests, these receptors are found in the nucleus of the cell. When acted upon by certain chemicals, they carry out gene transcription. Now, recall that transcription is responsible for protein synthesis. Proteins made would include enzymes and hormones that exert several effects on the body. Now, think for a second. What substance do you think could pass the cell membrane and enter the nucleus of a cell? You guessed right. Substances that are highly lipophilic. These include your steroid hormones such as estrogen or testosterone, which are made from cholesterol. Under extracellular receptors, we have the following. There are G protein coupled receptors. Now, these receptors are the most abundant in your body. These G proteins contain 3 subunits, the alpha, beta, and gamma subunit. Why are they called G proteins? This is because they interact very heavily with GTP and GDP. Within the alpha subunit of the G protein, one can find GDP, which would represent the protein's inactive state. Now, pause for a minute. Think of it like this. Imagine you are playing a game of Stucky Bully. Now, when these G protein receptors become stimulated, the GDP bound in the alpha subunit dissociates. GTP now binds in the alpha subunit and causes a change in the structure of the G protein. This leads to the activation of the beta-gamma complex and the activated alpha subunits. The beta-gamma complex acts as the second messenger and causes further cell signaling. Then, there are ligand-gated ion channels. Recall that hormones bind to the ion channel and causes depolarization of the cell, usually caused by the influx of sodium or calcium ions. Finally, under the extracellular receptor bracket, we have kinase-linked receptors. A kinase-linked receptor is a transmembrane receptor which uses second messenger signaling that triggers a cascade of cellular events. Ligands bind to the receptor binding site at the extracellular domain, which causes phosphorylation of amino acids, mainly tyrosine, with the intracellular domain. Key point: phosphorylation of proteins lead to their activation. What do these receptors do? They receive. Let's look at drug receptor interactions. We must dissect some key terms to enable full understanding of this concept. Efficacy refers to how well a drug activates receptors when bound to it. When these receptors are activated, it causes a response. Affinity, however, refers to how well a drug binds to receptors. Agonists, also known as full agonists, bind and activate receptors and cause a response. Therefore, we can say they have both efficacy and affinity. A subtype of this category are partial agonists. These work similarly to agonists, but they don't activate the receptors fully and only elicit a partial or submaximal response. Antagonists, though, bind to the receptors but do not activate receptors, causing no response. Therefore, we can say that these drugs have affinity but no efficacy. Competitive antagonists and agonists have affinity for the same receptors. Hence, they fight to see who can bind first. These antagonists inhibit the receptors. The inhibition, however, can be overcome with an increased dose of the agonist. See below for the graphical representation. The graph highlights the point made earlier. Due to the competitive antagonism, it would take far more agonists to effectively kick out the antagonist from the receptors. Now, since it will take far more agonists to achieve the same effects, the curve is shifted to the right. You will see this point further in our section on potency. Non-competitive antagonists bind to the allosteric or alternative sites and alter the active site. This alteration decreases the affinity of agonist drugs, as the agonist can't fully bind. Hence, we have decreased response, which results in a decrease in efficacy. Now, as you can see in the graph, since the efficacy has now been decreased, you realize that there is a submaximal response on the graph with non-competitive antagonism. So now that you get that, let's look at the dose-response relationship. Potency refers to how strong a drug is. The potency of a drug is related to the affinity of the receptor. So the stronger a drug binds to a receptor, the more affinity it has, and hence it will cause a stronger effect in the body. Now, why do we need to understand these things? Simply put, some drugs are more potent than others. Hence, a very potent drug only needs to be prescribed in a small quantity to achieve the desired effects. Imagine giving morphine in the quantities we use for IV fluids. Now that you are pros at potency, would competitive agonists cause an increase or decrease in potency? On the bright note, yes, decrease. Efficacy refers to the maximal response a drug can produce. To put it into perspective, full agonists have more efficacy than partial agonists. Now, take a look at this. With prolonged usage of a drug, efficacy can decrease. Why is this so? Imagine if you drank 3 shots of white rum every day for weeks and it made you feel real good. Eventually, your body would reach a point where it says, hey, this isn't cutting it for me anymore. I need more. What happened is that now you have an increased tolerance to 3 shots of rum. It will now take more than 3 shots of rum to achieve the same feeling you once got. That is the principle of drug tolerance. So, with repeated dosage of a drug, receptors become desensitized and downregulated. This means you will need a higher dose of the drug to achieve the same efficacy. That's it for now, folks.